So the final regionals ended up happening here over the weekend in China. And with that being said, it's very interesting to see who ended up actually taking this. We have a new champion that was able to take this as a legend. And not only that, the top 8 finally got broken in with some new legends that were able to send waves through this current meta. What are those deck lists looking like, and what can you expect as this game grows ever closer to being released worldwide? All of that and more starting right now. And what that is specifically meaning, of course, is that it is going to be able to have a lot of really good stuff in it to help get you a lot of runes. Mainly mobilize on turn 1. It's going to channel 1 rune exhausted. If you can, of course, you still draw 1, but still. And then, of course, with that, also Catalyst of Aeon, which is really interesting to be able to have as well. Just to be able to try to get you up to getting out big units, but more importantly, getting out Dazzling Aurora. Now, this is something that's really interesting, because we didn't necessarily see a lot of this happening with Master Yi. We saw this with Volibear, we saw this with Sett. But for this to actually be happening with Master Yi is really interesting, because this is a whole different dynamic than what we were used to seeing. First and foremost, with Yi, it was more so, let's go ahead and get units out to try to take battlefields early and then hold it and make it very difficult for my opponent to go ahead and retake those battlefields. I'm going to be doing things like Charm, doing things like Discipline, to help get maneuvering, units around and things of that nature. Also going out and helping out with, buffing up my units for the rest of the turn, try to get things. And not only that, you had a lot of card draw as well. And then also you had things like, Defy to stop spells from coming in with like Kaisa and things of that nature. Very strong deck in general, but this took a whole different dynamic. And gosh, let me just say, it was very interesting to see this gameplay, which we are also going to be releasing and commentating with that as well in a later video to see how this deck actually does perform. And let me just say, I am a believer in this deck, especially just with what it is able to do as a whole. I am impressed with what Dazzling Aurora is able to do with Master Yi. There was a game in particular on day 1, I think it was round number 2, yeah, because we had the hour and a half gap in that, and it forever for us to get to this next game. Ended up actually being because of cheating in this case, and they had to go ahead and deal with that. And that's, particularly sad, because that did happen on day 2, so there's no telling on how much that player was able to get away with previously. But we were waiting an hour and a half. I was watching Casanova's stream as well with Turn 'em Sideways. Really great channel, by the way. Check them out. I'm sure you guys already know about it, though, about that channel. But with that being said, this match was incredibly interesting. It wasn't the finals match by any means, but it was still really interesting to see how it was able to, go about on getting Dazzling Aurora out. And then you saw your opponent being at 6 points, just needed 2 more in this case. And then Yi just came right back in, dropping very massive units very easily, and then was able just to hold the battlefield and go literally from 0 to 8 points before opponents could even go ahead and get those final 2 points needed. Now, interestingly enough, and differently in the game with the opponent who was playing the battlefield to allow 1 more point needed to be able to win, which was Aspirant Climb. The opponent was able to go ahead and get 7 points, but the only reason that they were able to get to 7 points was due to the fact that they needed to get to 9, otherwise they would not be, or get to the 8th point, instead of getting to the 9th, was because of the climb in this case. Otherwise, they would still be 2 points away from victory otherwise. And so, still a really close game, but very interesting to be able to see how this was able to go and what it was able to do. Now, of course, you are still seeing only the one Master Yi, and rightfully so. But the ganking is still going to be absolutely insane to be able to try to move around and get things going. The ramp is going to be, first and foremost, the biggest thing, and it goes hand in hand with the hourglass. This is going to be one of the best things, because you can go ahead and play it as a hidden card if you so do so. There are going to be ways in which that can fizzle away in this case, unfortunately, so you got to be careful when you do play it hidden. But when you play it out onto the field, in your base, as you will, you are able to then go ahead and utilize it incredibly well, especially with how powerful it can be. Now, you don't have anything big until these guys, so you might be giving away a lot of points in this case, but then once you are finally able to get to that late game, man, you can really hit hard and hit fast. Now, Dead Blue Predator is going to be one of the biggest cards here because you might be getting really far behind, and your opponent might be getting near that 6, 7, 8 points to be able to win in this case. And Dead Blue Predator can immediately be summoned into an occupied battlefield. So that's going to be very difficult to have to defend against, especially if you do have other cards in your hand, such as the Discipline and, things of that nature as well. So really interesting to be able to see. And I mean, the fact that this was able to go ahead and get first place is really cool to see. And I'm going to be interested to see if we are not going to be exploring in this meta now a lot more of the Dazzling Auroras. And I mean, that could be very well played in the case of now we might be seeing a lot more gear destruction in side deck for that matter. That's going to be something really interesting. Is Dazzling Auroras now going to be in Sett deck? We've already kind of seen that, especially when Dazzling Auroras first came out. We saw Sett have Dazzling Auroras, Bear Dazzling Auroras, and now we have Master Yi. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how this continues to play out as a whole. But so far, I am really curious to see if this kind of becomes more of a staple instead. Because, I mean, as soon as you get to that late game, how do you go about then answering that with any other deck in particular? And it's like, can you? Well, time will tell in this case, and so it'll be fun to see how this ends up playing out, but really fun deck to be able to see. Now, we aren't going to be necessarily looking at the other 3 decks in particular in the top 4 because, well, they're all Master Yi in this case. You guys can go ahead and look on Piltover Archive if you do need to see any additional information with that. Still, though, I want to dive into this regional in this case with the 7th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th place decks that we are going to be looking at for the rest of this video. With that being said, Ahri was a really interesting build, of course. Now, for those of you who might not know, Ahri has a ability that when enemy units attack a battlefield you control, give it -1 this turn to a minimum of 1. And so, really interesting ability right there. It might be really effective here, and that can be difficult for you to overcome to be able to conquer battlefields here. Now, only one Ahri in particular in this entire deck list, and that of course is going to be the Alluring Ahri in this case. And when you hold, you score 1 point. So you're going to be basically trying to time everything right with that, because if you are going to then be able to get this card out properly, you can absolutely devastate the board state by getting a lot of points really fast. Now, of course, was not able to overcome Yi, but I mean, it was able to throughout the last 2 days of competition there, be able to make it to 7th place. Great job to be able to see that. Now, of course, this is kind of a hit it fast and hit it hard kind of deck in this case. We've got the Stalwart Poro, one of the better Poros of this deck here, being able to have shield +1 so that you are minusing 1 from an opponent that is attacking in, and then plussing 1 with the shield. Just really good stuff right there. Ravenbloom's Tune, so any spell that you play adds +1 might. That could be very helpful as well. Discipline, of course, Clockwork Keeper in case you need card draw, and again, just a way to move fast. Hourglass, Wielder of Water to help you hold and also attack in on. And then on top of that, you got your in-game stuff. Now, one thing that's really interesting here and that I absolutely love about this deck is Tasty Faith Hope is going to be really interesting to be able to see, because not only is it able to come in accelerated, which is just like Thousand Tail Walker, which is really great here, but not only that, it is able to also have a on-death ability, which is you channel 2 runes exhausted and you draw 1. So it really replaces itself. Really great card for it being just a 7 cost. And yeah, if you do decide to go up to that 8, you recycle 1. It can come in accelerated. It can attack into a battlefield right away. And it can even be a very powerful trade to try to clear up a battlefield for your other units to be able to move into the battlefield after attack. So really cool to be able to see all of that. And of course, the Thousand Tail Watcher, to be able to just -3 might and everything. It can also come in accelerated, so you are going to be recycling 2 runes to be able to do so. And that can be a little bit difficult because it can slow you down if you do recycle too much. But if you look at the rest of this deck, there is not a lot of units that actually recycle in this case. And so You could have Sprite Mother that would recycle one, but that is a really good ability for what you're getting. Charm, and then of course your Ahri outside the deck as well. So just, really interesting dynamic here, and it's able to do really good. And then of course with that, if you can go ahead and get the Ahri in to a battlefield, you can score an additional point as well, and that can even be the winning point, because that is an ability in this case that is outside of the win con needed. So if you only control one and you get the upkeep, then the Ahri activates and gets you the 8th point. That is a great way for you to win. So if you can plan that out properly, you're going to be able to do so incredibly well. I don't know how I feel necessarily about the Seal of Insight. Only running one, I would probably, switch it out in this case. But then again, this player did get 7th place and I didn't. But still, just having a one of in this case, like even when I do see it, I'm not necessarily looking forward to it in the sense of, what am I getting out of this as a one drop? If I get it in my opening hand, which is, okay, it's not necessarily going to be putting in a lot of work for me at all, except for the Thousand Tail Watcher and the Sprite Mother. And so I just think there could be, maybe another ability that could help out. Maybe what I would put in this case, I'm a big proponent of Singularity, even though that is definitely something that does need to be recycled in this case as well. But it's able to do a lot. And then on top of that, if you do get to 6 points, then your win con, of course, is going to be Time Warp. And again, that's going to be something that the Seal will be able to help with, where you don't need to recycle as many, but still, if you're doing Time Warp, you're doing it for pretty much the end game. You're doing it to win the game at this point. And so that's going to be your big thing. But again, you're running 3 of those. And that can be a difficult thing, because sometimes that, fill up your hand, but you're not necessarily able to use it, and that can be very difficult. But man, if you're able to get up to those 6 points, take both battlefields, and then go ahead and hit Time Warp, it can be really good. With that being said, though, there are some things in the sideboard that can really help you out getting to that point, and that's going to be Rune Prison, Adaptation, Echo, 1 Blitzcrank, which is interesting as well, and Unchecked Power. Now, of course, that is exhaust all friendly units, then deal 12 to all units at battlefield. So a lot of this time, the going ahead and exhausting each of your units isn't necessarily anything to be worried about, because yeah, it is stopping you for the turn, but you are able to clear both battlefields in this case. And it is expensive, but still is a really good card, especially on getting over those big boards, the Volley Bears, even like the Master Yi Auroras that we're seeing here as well. Really interesting stuff to be able to see. Now, Adaptation is interesting, because when I conquer, you may kill a gear. If you do, buff it. And so that's going to be interesting as well. Now, of course, when you conquer, that's going to be a very interesting thing, because it's when this card in particular conquers. And so that's going to be the hard part, because there are going to be times, for example, where you're able to choose how damage is dealt as the opponent. And so if you go ahead and just target Adaptatron in this case, then you might not be able to get this activated to kill the gear. But still, it is a very interesting dynamic here. Echo is really interesting as well, because you can go ahead and accelerate him. You are still going to be recycling 2, of course, to be able to get him accelerated and pay for the power cost to be able to get him into the battlefield. But then once you do, you can attack right in, ready all of the runes at that point as well, and continue with having a really big turn with that. So really interesting. Blitzcrank, though, is just such a good card to be able to grab something and move it over. He also has Ink, which is really good. We have seen in the past some difficulty on remembering that he does go back and attack, but really interesting to be able to see how all of that is unraveled. So I, for one, am a really big proponent here for this Ahri deck, and I'm thinking we're going to see still some other variations of Ahri as well, and could very well still be something that is in the meta. And this is something that's really interesting for me as well, because I do feel like that this meta is still very much undefined. Yes, we have a ton of Kaisa, we have a ton of Yi, that's great, but we're now seeing a lot of interesting numbers coming up, especially with Sett and things of that nature, Ahri being the other one as well. And I still feel like a lot of these decks are still trying to be figured out. We've only had 4 regionals in that matter, and the game has only been out in China, for a month and a half at this point. Not only that, but we also have a lot of tournaments that are happening over here in the English part of the world, where we're running a lot of online tournaments with Rift Lab trials and clashes and things like that. Weekly tournaments like Riftbound Meta is running, and some other proponents in this world as well is running. Really great stuff to be able to see, but people are still even trying to figure it out. Annie's even been making some really big waves in like the Riftbound clashes, where they ended up getting first in one of the round robins in this case as well. So really great stuff to be able to see. Timo even is a really big proponent, and I still feel like that legend in and of himself still has a lot to be discovered as well. And so this meta is still pretty wide open. It is definitely getting more defined as to what, you know, Yi and Kai'Sa are able to do as the top 2 decks, but still, it's like, don't count them out just yet. Yes, Yi is going to be very difficult now to beat if the Auroras are able to go ahead and become that proponent, but at the same time, there are still answers that you could very well have as well to go against these decks. So don't go ahead and count them out just yet. It's going to be really interesting to see how this meta continues to evolve. Now, with that being said, the 5th place deck is a Sett. Yes, this is something that I've been calling for a long time, and something that I've been watching out for, because Sett is a great legend. He probably has one of the best, if not the best, legend ability in and of itself. And so to see it not necessarily go ahead and make it into these regionals, and it's like, why not? You're playing a ton of Victor. Why are you playing so much Victor and so few Sett? It was something that I just didn't necessarily get. That was one of the hardest parts for me, because I think Sett is one of the best legends out there, and this deck is a very powerful and underutilized one at that. Same with the Darius baited hook as well, but that's going to be a separate conversation, because none of those made top 8. But still, we had multiple Setts that were able to go ahead and break in, and this is what is so interesting. So for those of you who might not know, the bot, the legend himself, Sett. When a buff unit you control would die, you may recycle and exhaust the card itself, the legend card itself, and spend its buff, and we call it exhausted instead. It sends it back to base, and it isn't a move. And when you conquer, you can also ready this, so there is a good chance that you could even do this multiple times, which is really interesting to be able to have. Even something where you go ahead and attack in, destroy some very powerful units, you activate the ability, recycling a rune, bring that unit back that tried to take the battlefield that would die, and then with the other units that you have that are still at the ready, and then go into the battlefield and take it with a lot more ease. Then the legend card readies up again, and you can potentially use that on the following turn. When your opponent tries to take back the battlefield, you're able to take your buff strongest unit, or the unit that you would prefer most in that case, save them and bring them back to base to fight another day. Woo, that's really good. So with that being said though, the hardest part and the biggest dynamic is that you don't overextend yourself. What I mean by that is that you don't continually recycle card after card after card after card, to where you have nothing left in your rune deck and you kind of defeat yourself in this case. That's something that you got to be very careful about with this deck, and that's why it can be a very difficult dynamic to try to juggle around. But still, when you're going against something like Kai'Sa, for example, Sett can come in and be like, hey, you have to spend your spell to go ahead and try to defeat me here. But at the same time, I'm going to then be able to go ahead and bring my unit back to base and all for an exhausted rune, and then my card is going to come back with a vengeance. And so it can really outlast a lot of those in-hand abilities, those spells that you might have, and be able to go ahead and continue to keep attacking again and again. And so that can be something that is so difficult to be able to do. Now, of course, this place deck, it's going to be really interesting. Now, first off, we have this Sett, the Kingpin. He's going to be the one that mainly you keep outside of the deck potentially, and you get +1 might for each buff friendly unit at my battlefield. So that can add a decent amount as well. Not only that, though, this Sett as well is so good at getting over the big units at battlefield, because when I'm played and when I conquer, it automatically goes ahead and gets the buff. Not only that, you can spend a buff and give it +4 might this turn for a total of 8. That's insane. That also is very difficult to try to get over as well. And then with that, you can go ahead and spin the buff him again, you know, spend a buff, give him +4. You can do that really as many times as you are able to buff him and spend it as well. So there's really crazy stuff right there with that. Now, of course, Showstopper is a 1-cost recycle one as well. You get to buff a friendly unit, then move them from in your base to a battlefield of choice. So really good stuff right there. You can get a lot of crazy stuff going right there. Sabotage is great for the removal as well, getting some stuff taken out of your opponent's hand that you won't necessarily need, even if or want to see. And then, even if you aren't able to necessarily target like a spell or a gear or things of that nature, that's almost perfectly fine, because then you have the entire hand knowledge. You know what to expect when you are maybe considering going into a battlefield. You see a Master Yi and you're like, let me go ahead and see what's in your hand. Maybe take out a Discipline, maybe take out a Charm or things like that. You're hoping they don't have a Defy in hand, because that can be countered, by Defy. But still, then you're able to see what's in the hand and go from there. So a lot of great knowledge there, and then a lot of really cheap units that can come in, take a lot of battlefields in this case. Pit Rookie is one of the favorites here. Going around even as Pookie, as T-Mac, passed it to my dude, and he continually would have a counter for any time Pit Rookie has come around, and it is one of the most prominently played cards in this case as well. Then you just have a lot of really surprising things right here. Jhin is going to be a really awesome card because it does basically have a flash ability for those of you who know Magic the Gathering, but it is a reaction in this case. You can play it at any time, even before spells and abilities resolve, including a battlefield to a battlefield you control. And so you can just go ahead and play him in a battlefield. It comes in with shield +2, so it's 5 might out of nowhere, which can really surprise your opponent. And then it also is a tank where it gets dealt damage first. So you can just go ahead and save 3 might and be like, hey, my dude, here you go, good luck, and surprise them with that. First mate is also going to be really good to all of a sudden ready a unit. And then even in the main deck, we have Leona as well, 2 of them that are being run, and that can really help take things over, because when I attack, you stun in a unit, meaning that they don't deal damage. And then also having shield as they hold. Really good stuff right there. And Kiko Monk is really good as well, because when you play me, you buff 2 other friendly units. That can sometimes fall a little bit short, though, if you are really struggling on getting units out. Of course, with that as well, these aren't counters like in Magic the Gathering, where you can only have 1 buff per unit, and so you have to be really careful about how you distribute that. But still, really great cards right here. Kaisa support, some geared destruction, really good job with that as well. Another challenge if needed, and a Fiora, which would just be really good, because while it's mighty, aka having 5 or more might, it has deflect, ganking, and shield, so a lot of stuff. Ganking is going to be a really big attribute as well with the Fiora as well, because it's just so strong, being able to just move from one battlefield to another. That is absolutely crazy, and so really fun stuff to be able to see with this set. And now Kaisa, 8th place. Wow, and that was the best showing. 4 Master Yis were able to make it to top 4. Only 1 Kaisa was even able to break into the top 8. So really surprising there. And this deck list is actually pretty standard, all things considered. Only 1 Kaisa, though, which is kind of interesting to consider. Howdy Poro can be really good as well. Falling Star is really one of the best cards, especially when going against Master Yi, because it cannot be defied. So really great card right there for that. Otherwise, just pretty standard stuff here. Mundo is going to be really good as well, being able to go ahead and just have a lot of might, because it is increased by the number of cards in your trash, and you recycle 3 every turn. And Draven as well, where your might is increased by 10. So just able to really get big, fast, and able to maintain the battlefield. And then, of course, 1-time warp, just in case you're able to go ahead and take the battlefield. Now, this is really interesting as well, because when you play a card during your opponent's turn, you can create Recruit, which is really interesting as well. And that can be a really interesting counter for certain deck types and things of that nature. Right, Mother, again, if you do need to move a little bit more aggressive. Same with Noctis Hopeful. Smokescreen is really good, though. I almost want to keep that in the main deck, personally. I love what this card is able to do. Another Draven as well, and Icathian Rain, which, I mean, can absolutely devastate those board states. You're able to, of course, do it 6 times, aka 12 damage. And if you have the correct battlefield out, which actually isn't in this deck. It adds an additional, it's Void something. Void Storm, something like that. And you are able to deal 1 additional damage. So you're dealing 18 damage to those units in those battlefields. That's absolutely great, or in that battlefield. That's crazy. Otherwise, this is a pretty standard deck, all things considered, and so really cool to be able to see. I'm really surprised by the 1 Kaisa, because it can be so good coming in accelerated at this point. You know, especially just for a 1 recycle, 1 power in this case, because it's played accelerated. Really good stuff right there, and awesome to be able to see. So just really cool stuff to have here. Pretty standard though, and interesting that it was the only Kaisa deck that was able to make top 8. Now, of course, for the final set, this was 6th place. Both of these, are really all these decks that we have been looking at, ended up losing to Mastery Yi, so that is something to keep in mind here as well. And so with this, again, pretty standard stuff. Not only 1 set in this case of the Kingpin, 3 of the other, 3 showstoppers, Pit Rookies, you know, Cloudfield, Hidden Blade. Base Breaker is going to be a little bit different here, where you stun a unit, a friendly unit, and an enemy unit. So that's going to be really helpful to where you stun something like Cloudfield in this case. Oh, I lose 1 might, but you lose your 6 might unit. That's pretty dangerous, and there are a lot of things you can then do to go above that. Challenge is just going to be really good on dealing with things you can also target units in bases, which would be very good right there. All the Glory is one of the best cards in this deck. Just go ahead and spend a buff. Play this card for free, and you're able to give a unit +3, and it is a react, and it can be played at any time. Arena Bar, there's only 1 of in this case. Buff an exhausted friendly unit. Really fun, really great stuff to be able to do with some consistency, though there is only 1 in there. It is a gear, and we probably will be seeing more gear destruction in this case. But then also 3 Lee Sins. Now this is going to be really interesting because it can come in accelerated. This isn't the other Lee Sin that you're going to necessarily be expecting to maybe see, but other buffed friendly units at my battlefield have +2. That can be an absolute game changer right there to be able to get a lot in, especially with him. And he can come in accelerated. So going in 7 and 1 power in this case, recycling 1, you can just go ahead and say, all right, well, all my units are buffed. I'm just going to move them in, and guess what? Instead of just having +1, they're going to be +3. Good luck. And if you decide to go ahead and try to take 1, well, I'm going to just activate my Legend ability, bring 1 back, the one that would be killed in this case, back to my base. You're going to probably see them next turn. So really interesting stuff to be able to see here. Really love the idea of this set deck. Just a really fun dynamic. And again, set can be a little bit harder to pilot. I still think Annie is probably one of the most difficult decks to pilot in this case, but still, set is just so cool to be able to see here. Now, with that being said, a pretty standard sideboard as well. I'm really curious about 3 Leonas as well. Really cool to see that she is getting some notice, even in the side deck and in some main decks as we have seen, which is really awesome to see. 1 additional Sabotage, and then 2 salvages as well, which was a very big deal here in this case. And the hard part is actually finding those. Just like your opponent is wanting to find the Auroras, if you don't have the salvages, that's going to be very difficult. Now, at the same time, you have to have the salvage and hope that your opponent does not have the Defy. Because if you're going against Yi, you can very easily have not only the Auroras that he's able to play, but then when the Auroras is out, well, you can go ahead and play salvage in this case, and they can just defy it. So that's very difficult to try to play around with. And that's the scary part too, because the biggest thing is, you know, there's not a whole lot that you might be able to do then to get rid of the Auroras, especially for Master Yi. But then even still, same thing, Unyielding Spirit to go ahead and deal with the Kaisas. They were able to deal with the Kaisas. Kaisas had the second biggest showing in this tournament as well. Really great stuff to be able to see. But anyway, guys, really fun deck to be able to see here. So with that being said, what deck surprised you most, and how did this change on your thoughts with the current meta? Are you maybe looking into maybe playing a little bit more Sett, maybe an Ahri as well? Do you think that they have what it takes to break into this meta and hopefully get some big wins coming up, especially as we grow ever closer to getting this game released? Go ahead and let me know down in the comments below, and until next time, guys,